Cool. So in one word, how would you describe climate science? And maybe we can start with Jack.
Hi, I'm Jack Whelan. I'm from Super, and I would describe climate science as progress.
Progress. Awesome. Do you want to pass it on to the next person?
Mitchell Board is the next on my list here.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So yeah, Mitch here. Currently building a climate tech startup. A little bit too early to say exactly what it is. Climate science to me, in one word, would be tangible.
Tangible. Awesome. Thank you, Mitch. Who do you want to pass it on to?
Sorry, I forgot that bit. I'll pass it on to Alex, please.
Hey, thanks, Mitch. I just recently graduated last year, so I'm really excited by getting involved in this space and seeing all the cool things that you guys are up to. In one word, climate science, probably data.
Data. Yes. Cool.
I'll just go next. Should we just?
Sorry, I forgot to pass it on. Yeah, pass it on to Johan, please.
Sure. My name is Yuan. I run a small consultancy firm called State of Charge. I would say that climate science for me means direction.
Direction.
And I'll pass it over to Sally.
Hi, I'm Sally. I work for Our Energy. And climate science to me, one thing that's relevant to that is means measurement. And I'll pass it on to, hang on, I'm just going to go, Lee.
Hi, Lee. I'm in the studying product stewardship right now. I don't know what it's going to end up in being, but for me, climate science, one word would be visceral. And I'll pass it on to Caesar.
Hi, guys. Like Alex, I think data is climate science. And I pass to let's see, Tim Prosa.
Thanks, Cesar. Tim here. I work with OzHarvest, so food rescue and food sustainability is my thing. The word that I think resonates with me around climate science is consensus. And who hasn't been yet? Jack, did you go? No, I think you've been, haven't you? Hubert.
Thomas, maybe?
Hubert.
Actually, maybe. Hubert.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, cool. Yep. So yeah, Howard from War Watchers with Marie as well. So for me, I think climate science was thinking of data, but maybe because it was taken twice, I'm thinking of trend or pattern.
Love it. Maybe Thomas?
Yep, sorry, forgot that bit.
I'll finish off. I'm Thomas Nan. I'm leading a startup called Electroenergy, and we sell energy storage solutions. And for me, climate science is exciting. I think I'm the last one, right?
No, I think we have another Alex and Ivana as well.
Okay, so I'll pass on to the second Alex.
Thanks, Thomas. So I'm a co-founder with Mitch, and we are working on something new. We'll soon kind of talk about it, but for me, data science is evidence and some sort of a proof. Pass over to the last person in the line. Sorry, forgot the name.
Hello. No one can ever pronounce my name, so I presume that's why I'm last. My name's Ivana. I'm the founder of Terran Industries. We're a consultancy supply chain facilitation in the sustainability sector. I would describe climate science as collaboration.
Collaboration.
And I'd like to go. Charlotte here from Climate Salad. I was thinking undeniable, but I'd like to change that one word to opportunity.
Thanks, everyone. I think the words that are chosen really reflect what like the audience that we have today. I think you guys are, you know, community that is always already integrated and embedded into climate action. So you guys are living and breathing this stuff every day, which is awesome. But unfortunately, when you ask some people about climate science, it's not always what they say, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So today we're going to talk about climate literacy. And we do this because we feel very strongly that the problem of climate change is not understood enough. And that's something that we're addressing. But we also want to talk about climate literacy because we want to empower action. So not just awareness, but it's also about triggering action. So our agenda for today, very quickly, I'll talk to you a little bit about the organization behind Climate Fresk and our theory of change. And then we'll play an interactive sneak peek of the Climate Fresk game. So the idea is to test your climate knowledge in a very safe, positive, and non-judgmental way. And then we'll open it up for Q&A and open discussion. So as I said, when we talk about climate science, quite a lot of time, the words that come are not always the very positive words that you guys mentioned. So people tend to find it scary, maybe overwhelming, sometimes even terrifying. In a lot of times, it's also something that's for others, so something that they don't consider central to themselves. So maybe it's for the big polluters, or maybe it's for the experts, but you know, for other people. Sometimes they say it's not their priority because they feel they're already doing quite a lot and already doing what they can. And I think that sort of I don't want to learn about it mentality can be perhaps a bit of a protection mechanism. So if I did learn about this, then maybe I would have to suffer or make compromises that I'm not willing to make. So I think it's fair to say that if you're not living climate and working on climate already, climate science is not the most accessible or easy to engage with. And that's part of why Climate Fresk exists. Just want to show quickly this concepts that we talk about a lot in our workshop called the pyramid of action, and it's of inaction, sorry, we try to turn it into the pyramid of action. And it's this idea that it's always somebody else's responsibility to solve the problem. So, hey, it's the government, or hey, it's the corporate sector, or hey, it's up to the citizen to do something. And they're always pointing at someone else as if it was somebody else's responsibility to solve climate change. So what we try to do in our workshop is to turn this pyramid of inaction into a pyramid of action and try to recognize very early on, it kind of preempt these sort of reactions and say, hey, we're all in this together. And the only way that we're going to solve climate change is if all of those spheres of society are able to come together and collaborate and start taking action at the same time and really rapidly and with scale, because that's what we need. So rather than the kind of negative thoughts, what I've learned is in my climate journey so far is that we need to reframe the conversation around climate science and how we look at the climate crisis. And so climate science in action, very far from being boring or scary, terrifying, can be one, essential because we need to know about this stuff, but it can be also joyful. So once you start getting into the practices that are aligned with your values, then it becomes something that is actually enjoyable. It's for everyone. So something we really emphasize on in our workshop. So climate science and action is for everyone, not just people who are already on the good side. And the Climate Fresk tool is, we're trying to be as neutral as possible, and we try to involve everyone in the process, from climate deniers to experts and everyone in between. So we all have something to learn, including us facilitators. We're not experts in climate science. I'm definitely not an expert in climate science, and yet I'm a climate science facilitator. It's for everyone also, because even if you don't consider yourself a big polluter, learning more about climate science and action can still be hugely beneficial. Constructive and protective, and so, you know, it's not so much about taking things away, but it can be about opening up space for new and exciting things. Complex, so we definitely recognize that it's complex, and I think some of this wording came into the words that you mentioned. So that's just a reality, and we need to be able to confront ourselves to that complexity, and then it can be pretty exciting and fascinating. And then finally, uniting and empowering. So that's what we're trying to convey with our workshops. So again, very much of a teaser at this point, because I don't want to reveal too much. But the Climate Fresk workshop is 1, a card game, 2, a way to deal with climate emotions, and 3, a solutions workshop. So all of those 3 things all rolled in one. The first thing we do when we start a workshop is we set the stage by stating that the game is based on a recognized authority. We very rarely have climate deniers in our workshop. I personally haven't come across one yet, but it's still good to ground the workshop in science and explain what the IPCC is. Also important is to make it a safe space. So we tell people to come as they are. And in our communication, we make it very clear that everyone is welcome, welcome to come and be vulnerable and learn. And we set up those opportunities during the workshop for people to be wrong, and also for facilitators to be wrong, because we don't have all the answers. We also want to make it interactive, hands-on, fun, and creative. And that's something super important, is that it's people who are doing the work and they're moving the cards themselves. Us facilitators, we're not talking that much, we're not intervening that much. It's really about people interacting with each other and doing the work. There's a very low barrier to entry for people to become facilitators themselves, again, because it's fun and creative, and you don't need to be an expert. Make it collective. So the game is based on collective intelligence. People work in small groups, and the goal is to get to the solution as a group, as a team, and we really insist on that aspect. It's very accessible, so very low cost, very low tech. Anyone can play it. We're doing this because we're trying to touch as many people as possible. It's about people raising up their voices. And again, it's something we're very clear about from the beginning. We're not here to answer questions, but rather we ask people to ask other people in the group, and we encourage people to share their own personal stories and anecdotes, and starts the work of articulating the science themselves. And then finally, we make it relevant. We again encourage people to share their stories and link the Climate Fresk cards to the news, link them to their local context, what's happening, what are they experiencing with climate change, as a way to make it more relatable for people. We make it an opportunity, so people can participate to this workshop and then do this workshop for others. So it's not an end, but a step forward, and it's a way for people to start interacting with climate science a little bit more. And then finally, we cover emotions and solutions. So as I said, the workshop is in 3 parts. And we spend a lot of time covering emotions and solutions because we recognize it's a really important part of the process. And we know that it's not just about the science, right? We know that if it was just about the science, we would have solved this problem a long time ago. So we really insist on covering emotions and solutions. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this graph that describes the different stages that people go through in the process of change, which applies to climate, but also to any kind of radical change. And as facilitators, we also see ourselves as facilitators of the stages of change. So what you can see here is the kind of typical journey that people go through when they become aware of the climate crisis. And we show it really transparently during our workshops. We ask people to try and identify where they might be in that journey. So people come to the workshops at various levels of, denial, anger, negotiation, and depression. And that also applies to companies, countries, or societies. If you were to guess or like pick a stage, where do you think Australia is in the stages of change when it comes to climate?
You mean Australia as a whole or the government?
Yeah.
The government?
Yeah, where? Let's say Scott Morrison or Australia as a whole.
Denial.
Yeah.
Ignorance.
So there's work to do, right? And we see people go through this process even during the workshop themselves. So some people who come in and think they already know, and very often they hit this shock portion at some point, and we see those kind of raw emotions during the workshop, some denial, some anger. It can get pretty intense by the middle of it, and really try to recognize this and try to lift people into the later stages of acceptance and experimentation and decision. And we focus on collective action because it's proven that collective action is critical in climate action, but also because we know that people who start taking action together tend to keep going. So that's for the little introduction. And on a more practical level, let me tell you just a little bit about what is Climate Fresk. So it's a card game. It's based on 42 cards that each represent one element of climate change. And the goal of the game is for people to identify links of cause to consequence between those cards and put them together to form what we call a fresk, which is a visual representation of the climate system. So the mission of Climate Fresk and the nonprofit organization that's behind the game is to spread climate literacy to 1 million people and build climate leadership. So we're at 300,000 at the moment, and we think we'll hit 1 million people somewhere within the next year. The game is interactive, so I already mentioned that. You can play online and you can play in person. There's a version for kids, which is a simplified version of the adults game. The game is based on Creative Commons tools, so it's free for educational use. But if you use it in the context of a business, then you have to give royalties back to the nonprofit organization, and that's how they're able to fund themselves and grow the tool globally. Again, based on science-based IPCC, which represents the consensus of the scientific community. So we always tell people, it's Nobel Prize winning, all governments in the world, including the climate laggards, back these reports. So Australia has signed the IPCC reports. It's their report that everyone should know about, but because it's really, I don't know if how many people have actually read an IPCC report or even just the summary for policymakers. It's stuff that it's not very easy to digest. So the game kind of helps translate that information into something that's digestible for everyone. And then finally, the Climate Fresk relies on a vibrant community of citizen facilitators. So we have about 10,000 people at the moment globally. So I think we have a presence in about 55 countries, and the game has been translated into 35 languages. And that vibrant community is working on a volunteer basis to spread the tool and raise climate awareness and literacy. That's our trajectory of growth. And, you know, I don't think exponential growth is always necessarily a good thing, but I think in this case, it's definitely one of the good types. So we started in January 2018. We started really small. And then, you know, 3 years later, we're at 300,000. So if we continue on this trajectory, as I mentioned, we should hit 1 million people somewhere between 2023 and 2024. So the game was created by a former teacher and climate expert and engineer called Cedric Ringenbach back in 2015. And he created the nonprofit organization that is known as Climate Fresk now in 2018. And he gave all the licensing rights to the game to the nonprofit organization. So just to show you a little bit about what it looks like. So here we have some examples of some fresks or collage that have been created. So every workshop is different, and the visual representation that people create is always different. There's a big creativity component to it. So we encourage people to draw on their fresk and give it a title. So you can see in this example, the title was The Call for Change, but and on the left, the title, I don't know if you can read it, but it was Highway to Hell. So sometimes titles are super positive, sometimes it's a little bit less positive, but we really encourage people to be as artistic as they want to and make it their own. We have a quiz version of the game. So that's the version that we're going to play today, which is really meant to be a teaser version. So not a short version, but really to encourage people to pique their interest and encourage them to come to the workshop. So we played this in events and festivals and conferences. So that's the quiz version, which doesn't have 42 cards, has a lot less cards to make it easier, and the cards are already placed on the board. And as I mentioned, we also have a kids version that we play in schools quite successfully. So I think we have about 50,000 school students that have participated. The game is simplified, so there's only 21 cards, not 42. And kids can play from the age of 9. Probably the recommendation is 11 years old. Right, so I think that's it for the little introduction. As I said, I didn't want to talk too much at you, and I want to leave enough time to actually play the game. Is there any question before we move on to the part where we actually play? All right, no questions. Cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is an initiative from France. So where it started?
It started in France, yes. And still the majority of workshops have been played in France, but it's expanding to over 55 countries, and each country has a local representative. So I'm the representative for Australia with one other person. And we kind of help grow the tool in our countries.
Okay.
So in Australia, we started last year. So we're still relatively small compared to France, but have ambition to grow the tool in Australia.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so from now on, I don't know if you guys can see my screen, you should see a lot of cards that are hidden. Yeah. So I'm gonna ask you to, if you can stop your video, but unmute yourselves unless there's some background noise around you. And this is the part where I'm going to talk a lot less, and I'm just going to start asking you questions. So what you can see here is the simplified version of the game. So usually we have 42 cards, but I think in this version we probably have around maybe 30-ish. And I'm going to ask you questions to kind of direct you. But otherwise, it's up to you to find the cards that are hidden by answering questions. So we're going to try and do it like this. And we're going to start with these cards at the center that are additional greenhouse effects and CO2 emissions. So all the way to the left of those cards, we're going to see the causes of climate change and what is causing the greenhouse effects. And all the way to the right, we're going to have a look at the consequences. So we can start with either the causes or the consequences. That's really up to you. So anybody can decide. And we'll go from there. So anybody wants to pick causes or consequences?
Causes.
Causes. Cool. All right, let's do it. All right, so we have the additional greenhouse effects and CO2 emissions, because I think at this point, everybody knows that climate change is caused in a majority by CO2 emissions. So what do you think is causing CO2 emissions?
Burning fossil fuels.
Correct, fossil fuels. What are these?
Oil, gas, coal.
Yep, oil, gas, coal. So if we zoom in on these cards, we can see the evolution of CO2 emissions caused by those fossil fuels and how it's been growing since the 1900s. Do you know what sparked that sharp increase from the 1900s and then acceleration from the 1950s?
World War I.
Yeah, so we have the World War.
Invention of the car.
Henry Ford and Tim Lissy.
Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, so Henry Ford, Industrial Revolution. So
The car was
invention of the
originally
combustion
electric.
engine. Yeah, all correct. So it was in 1784 that James Watt invented the efficient steam engine, and that marks the beginning of our addiction to fossil fuels. So how do we use those fossil fuels? What are they used in?
Produce energy.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Produce energy.
Radius energy. What?
Produce energy.
Yeah, so use energy. And what do we need this energy for?
Mobility, generate electricity.
Yep, so mobility, so that's transport. So we have the different means of transportation. So obviously, most of the emissions from transportations are coming from cars and trucks, but we also have sea travel and sea freight, as well as air travel and air freight. So transportation is a big source of emissions worldwide.
Energy for heating, energy for manufacturing.
Yep. So we have. I'll come back to eating in a minute. So we have manufacturing. So the word that we have is industry, and that's not just industrial and manufacture, right? It's pretty much everything that we consume. So that's why we can see the big factories on the card, but we can also see a woman with a shopping bag, because you know, everything that we consume has to be produced. And what else?
Cooling.
Producing electricity.
Yeah, so we don't have a card for electricity, but we have a card that describes what we use this electricity for. So obviously we need electricity for a lot of different sectors, but what's one of the main sectors that we use electricity for?
Cooling.
Buildings.
Yeah, exactly. So buildings, and here that's building usage, because the construction of the building will be included in the industry. So when we talk about usage, what do we talk about really?
Like the refrigeration, cooking, kitchen appliances, day-to-day
Yep.
appliances.
Yeah. So
Also
yeah,
materials?
appliances, and also like heating and cooling our homes. So in Australia, probably cooling more than heating, but yeah, that's the bulk of the electricity use. And then the last sector that I think you guys mentioned already is eating. So that's agriculture. So you might see that there's no link, direct link between agriculture and fossil fuels. So that's not to say that agriculture doesn't require fossil fuels at all. So we can see on the cards, the tractors, so that definitely requires fossil fuels. But what's the main problem with agriculture?
Methane.
Methane, yeah.
Methane, yeah. So what happens with methane?
Cows poo and fart.
Methane is 82 times stronger than CO2.
Yep. Yeah. So methane is, so we include methane in that umbrella card that says other greenhouse gases. Somebody said cows farts. You know, in our workshops, we always consider that if you can get people to say cow farts, you've succeeded in your workshop. So that's always a bonus. Always makes people laugh. But you know, actually, it's not farts that produce the methane. What is it?
Burps.
Burps.
Regurgitation.
Breathing, yeah.
So what's happening in the stomach of those cows?
Decomposition.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
I think it's microorganisms, if I remember correctly, that create the methane.
Yeah, and they create the methane because they're being decomposed in an environment that doesn't have oxygen. So anaerobic, so without oxygen, decomposition creates that methane, which is, as somebody mentioned, a really, really potent greenhouse gas, much more powerful than CO2. Anybody knows why we have rice on that card as well? Here?
Yeah, same goes with the water that rice grows in.
Sorry, I had two answers. I think somebody said methane and the other.
I said deforestation.
Deforestation. Okay.
No, the water the rice grows in has the same impact.
So I'm not too knowledgeable about how much water rice cultures need. That might be an issue. But here we're focusing on the greenhouse impact. And yes, so rice cultures also produce methane, and they're one of the big sources of methane emissions worldwide. And again, that's, yeah.
It's the life or the microorganism with the water pool that is used for growing rice.
Yeah, exactly. And those this stuff that grows underwater, so there's no oxygen there, and that's why, again, it produces methane. Somebody mentioned deforestation. So yes, deforestation is linked to agriculture, but why is that?
It takes away a carbon sink that's natural, and so that produces more emissions coming from the that was trapped by the natural, the forest and other grasses and things like that.
Yes, yes. So it's true. It's true that obviously it removes the ability of trees to perform their role as a carbon sink, but that's not actually the main problem with deforestation.
Yeah, so you need areas or lands to grow monoculture or more profitable crops.
Yeah,
and that's why people or countries get rid of forestry and plant something profitable. Like
yes, so that's the reason. Yeah, that's the reason why we clear lands. So it's to grow crops that are going to be used to feed animals, much more than humans. And I think Australia is one of the biggest deforesting countries in the developed world. I heard a statistic the other day saying that 53 hectares of land is being cleared in Australia every hour. And that's mainly to allow for beef production. So deforestation, talked about that. But so what is the biggest problem with deforestation? Why is it a problem that we're clearing land? So we said it removes space for trees that are natural carbon sinks, yes. But what's the other consequence? What happens when, what do we do with those trees?
Carbon is trapped in the tree, and then you burn it or use it somehow, so you're releasing it.
Yes. So this image is actually not a great representation of deforestation, because it looks like we're just cutting the tree and leaving it there. But the reality is that we burn the tree, right? And when we burn the tree, it releases all the CO2 that it's been accumulating. And so that creates a lot of CO2 emissions. So we can see on the graph here that deforestation is responsible for a pretty significant chunk of CO2 emissions. It's about 10%, and the rest being fossil fuels. Great. So we've tackled this whole area here, looking at the causes. All those usages are pointing to us humans. So it's human activity that is, and the way that we're using those fossil fuels that is creating this pollution. So that's, human activities. Now we're gonna take a look at what's happening here. So you guys mentioned carbon sinks, so trees being carbon sinks. What are the other carbon sinks? Where do these CO2 emissions go?
Ocean.
Ocean, yeah.
Ice.
It doesn't go directly in the ice. We'll see what's happening there.
The tundra underneath the ice in some cases.
Sorry?
So one of the concerns with the polar ice caps is as the ice caps melt, the tundra is exposed underneath it, and as that freezes, that releases huge quantities of methane.
Yes, yes. I think we have, actually we don't, so that's the permafrost. The permafrost card is in the actual game, it's not in this version.
Oh, okay.
Already too advanced.
Inorganic carbon sinks like carbonates, transition metal carbonates and this sort of thing?
So we're looking at the kind of three big natural sinks here.
Soil.
So we said, yeah, so we said soil, that's the goes in the trees. We said ocean, and whatever doesn't go in those natural carbon sinks ends up where?
Plants.
In the atmosphere.
Atmosphere, yeah, exactly. So we have three carbon sinks, and in the physical version of the workshop, this is a really fun card because you get to actually show in a really visual way where those CO2 emissions go. So people notice when they're playing the live version of the game that this card is looking really funny because the caption, the legend is looking upside down, and they're like, oh, what's happening here? And so what we say is, oh, how do you link that card to CO2 emissions? And then we do this little trick where we show them, oh, actually, this is just one card. So the carbon sinks card shows you where all the CO2 emissions are going, because nothing gets created, nothing gets lost, everything is transformed. So we have CO2 going into the ocean and into the atmosphere, which creates the additional greenhouse effect. Now, what happens when CO2 goes into the ocean?
It acidifies.
Yes. Ocean acidification. So this one is sometimes a surprise to people. So not everybody knows about ocean acidification. Lots of people obviously know about the greenhouse effect, but this one is a little bit less known, and the consequences of that are a little bit less known as well. So what can you explain a little bit about what happens when the oceans are becoming more acidic?
So the corals die, that is the first thing.
Yep, yep.
Basically, and then all the carbonates, everything that's basically calcium carbonate based starts to dissolve.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So all of these little organisms whose bodies are made of calcium because they have shells, they are having difficulties to develop. So here we have a card with a really funny name that is a little hard to remember, but people find it funny. So pteropods and coccolithophores, I probably am butchering the pronunciation, but we show them like what it looks like when the process of producing calcium is becoming more difficult because the pH of the ocean is increasing because the oceans are becoming more acidic. So, yeah.
It's decreasing if it's becoming more acidic.
Oh, sorry, decreasing. That's right. Actually, what do we have? Oh, yeah. So we can see it here. So the pH of the ocean is dropping, and we can see the different lines based on the different scenarios from the IPCC. And so that has a big impact on the whole marine biodiversity. So we talked a lot about we talk a lot about coral reefs in Australia, and they're definitely being affected. But because these organisms are sitting at the bottom of the food chain, if they disappear, it's the entire marine biodiversity that's being threatened. So here we have ocean acidification as the second large impact from climate change. Great. So you guys are really efficient. We've made it all the way to the causes. So now we can start taking a look at the consequences. So what are the consequences from the greenhouse effect?
Sorry, just before we go there, can I just ask you to go back? So when you say we've looked at causes, you're essentially describing specific activities that have an impact, but what, yeah, and maybe I've missed it and maybe it's in the bigger game, but I think one of the challenges is actually our ways of organizing ourselves and our economic models that, for example, value a water body for its utility in growing rice, not the water utility's value in creating diverse ecosystems that allow us to survive. So do you go into those sort of challenges? For example, the economic model around, you know, we have the capacity for infinite growth, but we're in a finite system. Is that something you look at?
That's an excellent point. It's not covered in the cards themselves. So typically that's something that we would touch on more in the later phases of the workshop, in the debrief and discussion phases, because that stuff wouldn't be at least that I know of, correct me if I'm wrong, covered in the IPCC report. So IPCC reports are more focused on the actual like science and factual explanations of where all those CO2 emissions are coming from. So they don't really touch on capitalism being an issue or our way of building our economic models. But definitely once we start touching on what do we do, that question of how we organize our societies and our economic models are definitely coming up.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's a really important point to mention.
Also, Laura, just conscious of time, I think we are a little bit over, but maybe if we can go to 2 o'clock or my 1 o'clock.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the reminder. So the objective for today was not necessarily to make it through all the cards. It's really to show you how the game works and the logic behind it and how we run the workshop. So we can try and uncover a few more cards, and then we can have a quick Q&A and discussion maybe. Cool. So in here, we're going to have extreme weather events. So maybe we can skip the physical explanations, but what are the kind of visual manifestations of climate change that we experience today?
So once in a 100 or 200 year floods that happen monthly.
Yeah, these 1 in 100 year events, they're starting to occur a little bit too frequently, right? So we have, let me see if I got this one right. Yes, floods. So in Australia, we've definitely experienced the whole spectrum of those extreme weather events in the last couple of years. So we've seen floods, big flooding events in New South Wales last year. What else?
Droughts, I'll throw it out there. Same places that get flooded too.
Yes, so we've seen both those events where on one side we don't have enough water, and on the other side we have too much water. And all of these elements are coming from the fact that we're disrupting the whole water cycle, which means that some places are going to get more precipitation on average, and some places are going to get less precipitations. So in Australia, we've seen both of those, maybe a couple of others. What happened in 2019?
Fire.
Yep. So fires are a result of what?
Lack of rain and poor forest management.
Yes, probably partly, but when it comes to climate-related events.
According to News Corp.
Sorry?
Droughts and then thunderstorms.
Yeah, so we have a cyclones card. We don't have a thunderstorm card, but they're pretty similar. What happens when it gets really hot? Probably the most known manifestation of climate change, where the fact that we're talking about global warming. No? Maybe you've seen this in the news, probably, I don't know, like a month ago. There's a town in Australia that recorded its record in temperature. I think it exceeded,
heat.
Yeah, 50 degrees. So heat heat waves. And then another event related to water that's not floods, but more related to the oceans.
Tsunamis.
What happens when, so another big consequence of climate change is the sea level rising, which leads to what?
Coastal erosion, inundation.
Yeah, so inundation from the ocean, we call them marine submersions. So here we have all of these extreme weather events. And then finally, so maybe a couple more cards where we get to the end and we start talking about the consequences for us humans. So, you know, one of the big takeaways of Climate Fresk is that it starts here with humans, but it also ends here with us. So what are some of those negative consequences that arise from those extreme weather events?
Famine, as food industry supply chains collapse because
the
food industry can't relocate to changing temperatures quickly.
Yeah, so famines because of the decline in agricultural yields. What happens when people get hungry?
Demographic movements as they go to places where they can find food.
Correct.
Displacement.
Yep. So people have to get on the move, and what happens when people start moving to other countries?
Economic and social disruption.
Even more violent than that. Let's talk about the reality.
Refugee camps and walls going up and
Political interference.
Yeah.
Conflicts and inequality. Do you put that as a card or?
That one is just like the kind of consequences. All of this will impact human health, and as you can see, all of these consequences, they're all related to each other. Right, so we didn't uncover all the cards, and that's more than okay, because you know, that's not really the purpose of the game. Just wanted to play this quick teaser version of it. So the normal workshop is 3 hours, and we spend at least an hour to an hour and a half playing with those cards and getting to the whole fresk. So it was really a teaser version today. So yeah, just wanted to kind of demonstrate this tool to you. Just wanted to mention as well that we are running online and in-person events directed to the general public, so anyone can attend a workshop. And we also organize them for companies as well as public service organizations like councils, schools as well. So if anybody's interested in potentially learning a bit more, attending a workshop, or even become a facilitator, I would be super happy to talk to you. And I'll take any question if you have any.
I do know some people need to jump off. I would love to get a group photo. So if everybody can put their cameras back on, and I'll just do a little screenshot of everyone smiling, looking fantastically happy about the climate.
Yeah, let me share my screen again.
Oh, can I do the gallery view so I can see everybody?
How do I do that?
Maybe just not share your screen, and I'll put this in. Yeah. It's all good. All right. Smiling, happy. I don't know, like, is there Climate Fresk is a hand thing? Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.
Put your hand up. Yay. Thank you, guys. I do have a question. Do you get into the solutions as well?
Yes, super important. As I mentioned, we don't want to leave people with just the facts and the science. So a big part of the workshop is dedicated to talking about what is it that we can do as individuals, but also collectively as society. So the last module of the workshop and I'll send you more information, is an open discussion facilitated by the person who's leading the workshop, and people get to brainstorm about solutions, think about efforts versus impacts on different levels.
Any more questions, or is everyone's time up?
I'll send you guys a follow-up with more information. So I'm reading that some people in the chat potentially want to be facilitators. I'm loving this. It's awesome. Yeah, I'll send you more information. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, looking forward to hearing more from all the awesome companies that you guys are building.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Laura, for doing this. I know most of our members are really well versed in the climate science space and climate tech solutions. But I thought this might be a really great opportunity to, maybe grab some skills or grab some handy language to help with your teams as well. Thanks, Tim, for sharing that one pager too on food waste.
Yeah, read it. There's some nasty stuff in there. It shocked me. It's awful.
But at least we know, the solution.
It needs to be known. Yeah.
Laura,
I'll be very interested in connecting with you about food waste. There's some really pressing issues that we need to get some visibility of, because they're buried under the big pile of other stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of Oz Harvest.
So I've connected on LinkedIn, Laura, so hopefully we'll have a chat and we'll share some intel.
Sounds good.
Wonderful. And please do share your tips and summaries, any really good summaries too. So please keep on sharing. And Laura, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Have a